The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We had a big bombshell blockbuster story over the weekend, and it relates to that infamous Trump Tower meeting. This is the meeting attended by Donald Trump Jr. and Paul Manafort and Jared Kushner, as well as Russian lawyer, not Italian, Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya, at which dirt on Hillary was promised. It's the center of a lot of controversy. And the big news is that Michael Cohen now claims, Donald Trump's former personal lawyer now claims, that he was personally there when Donald Trump was told about the meeting ahead of time, something he previously denied knowing about, and also said, let's do it. And this, if true, is absolutely and totally massive. Michael Cohen is reportedly willing and ready to say this to Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller under oath, and it has been specifically and widely denied by Donald Trump, by everybody around him. Donald Trump claimed that he knew nothing about this meeting until he heard about it the following year when the New York Times asked him about it before they reported on it. That would obviously be untrue if Michael Cohen's allegations are true. Of course, Donald Trump continues to deny knowing about it. He says Cohen is lying to get himself out of other trouble. Donald Trump, among other tweets this weekend, sent one where he said, quote, "I did not know of the meeting with my son, Don Jr. Sounds to me like someone is trying to make up stories in order to get himself out of an unrelated jam. Taxi cabs, maybe? He even retained Bill and Crooked Hillary's lawyer. Gee, I wonder if they helped him make the choice." The problem is Trump's already been caught lying about this meeting, right? So aside from Cohen's claim that Trump knew about the meeting and approved the meeting, Donald Trump initially said he had nothing to do with drafting the letter that was published in response to news of the meeting. Later, we found out Trump dictated the letter. So if anybody here has a history of lying about this particular meeting, it's Donald Trump, not Michael Cohen. And Trump said it, multiple lawyers said it, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Trump Jr., they all said Trump knew nothing about it. And there have already been some hints that it isn't so clear Trump knew nothing. Because even though Rudy Giuliani now is saying it's all lies, back in May, Rudy Giuliani didn't even deny it. He vaguely sort of said, I would be surprised if Trump could remember knowing about the meeting ahead of time, which is very different than to say, no, Trump knew nothing about it. And then just last month, Rudy Giuliani said the following to George Stephanopoulos about who wrote that letter responding to the meeting, which of course was riddled with lies. Rudy Giuliani now explaining why, listen, everybody just changes their stories all the time.
And a lot of people look at the president's shifting explanations, the White House shifting explanations for what happened in that meeting at the Trump Tower back in June of 2016 with Don Jr. I remember when this was first reported, Jay Sekulow was on my program, so the president had nothing at all to do with that letter. Later, Sarah Sanders said, well, wait, he sort of weighed in, but he didn't dictate it. And now this letter from the president's lawyers say very, very clearly he dictated the statement. How do you explain those shifting explanations?
It happened to me with the whole situation of repaying the money that was laid out by Cohen. When the president first talked about it, nobody focused on it. Nobody thought about it. That was a very busy time. And then when we got on board, I went through everything. It was the only change we had to make. At that point, this other change had been made. When you consider the big scope of this narrative, four or five changes. It's a complicated
thing. The president was there. He was dealing with the letter. At first, it was all denied, and now you're saying he dictated.
But I don't know that Jay would have to answer that, and I've talked to him about it. I think Jay was wrong. I mean, this is the reason you don't let this president testify.
Right.
Our recollection keeps changing.
This is the best. Everyone's recollections are constantly changing. And Rudy Giuliani tries to excuse the fact that Trump lied by saying, listen, I also have lied on television before. Of course, not what he's actually implying. So Giuliani has also been vague about exactly what Trump knew and when. And then in March, remember Sam Nunberg, he said to CNN that, quote, he talked about it a week before, meaning Trump talked about the meeting a week before it happened. And then we also have Stephen Bannon, who in his own book said, quote, the chance that Don Jr. did not walk these Jumos up to his father's office on the 26th floor is 0, meaning that Trump Jr. clearly talked about it with Trump Sr. But you have to remember that all along, it always seemed like Trump knew about it and was lying, because 2 days before the meeting was on June 9, 2016. 2 days before that, June 7, 2016, here is Trump on video promising upcoming dirt on Hillary in just a few days. What a coincidence. The meeting was scheduled for the 9th, and on the 7th, Trump says, very soon, in a few days, I'm going to have news for you about Hillary Clinton.
I am going to give a major speech on probably Monday of next week, and we're going to be discussing all of the things that have taken place with the Clintons. I think you're going to find it very informative and very, very interesting.
Of course, that never happened because they didn't actually get the dirt at the meeting, but it's yet another piece of the story that makes it seem like Trump did know. In fact, there's nothing to suggest Trump didn't know. We've got 3 people saying Trump probably knew to Trump definitely knew. 2 days before, Trump previewed it. And even on the day of, there were some tweets sent that related to it.
Yeah, and he dictated the response. And also, this was a very small operation, right? His presidential campaign.
Yeah,
it
supposedly.
took place at his own building, the place where he lives and the place where he works. And it involved his son, his son-in-law, and his campaign manager. How did he not know about this?
He knows nothing about why would he know what's going on in his own building involving his own kids, his own campaign, and the person he's running against? That has nothing to do with the guy. He was making a deal for a window treatments at the time. Okay, so legal issues, possible legal issues. First of all, no one is claiming Cohen has recordings, right? So it would be Michael Cohen's word that Trump knew about it. And Cohen is willing to say that under oath to Robert Mueller. But let's imagine it could be proven, or at least like if it rises to a claim that Trump knew in advance and there was a room full of people who said, Trump said, let's do it, and you get some kind of corroboration. There's a legal source quoted by Politico which says, everybody in the room when Trump says, let's do this, is indictable if one overt act occurred after the meeting, such as actually having the meeting at Trump Tower. That is potentially accessory to conspiracy or a conspirator. Number 2, Barbara McQuaid is a former U.S. attorney. She says if Trump was aware of the meeting in advance and said, let's do it, that he could face criminal exposure under a number of different legal theories, although, of course, that's separate from whether you can indict a sitting president, right? The answer is probably not. You would first need to impeach. Not going to happen under a Republican House and Senate. And the big issue is going to be corroboration, because Cohen's claim alone isn't likely to make this open and shut. But if you've got Cohen's testimony under oath to Robert Mueller, and Mueller can find emails or texts that coincide with this, that people who were also in the room may have sent or received, then you have a different story. And Cohen plus Nunberg's testimony and some text messages, now you've got a building story. And this isn't about whether Trump knew. It seems almost blindingly obvious that he did. The question is, can you prove that Trump knew? And that's more complex. Slowly, every lie is falling apart. You'd have to be willingly ignorant or aggressively stupid at this point to think Trump had no idea about the meeting. But the question is, can it be proven?
I think so, and I think it's part of a broader strategy, right? Cohen puts out there that Trump knew about the meeting, and then he has his lawyers go on TV and have them deny it, and he denies it himself on Twitter, and then you release the tapes. I mean, that seems like a pretty good strategy to me.
Well, along those lines, one other thing. It's not 100% clear that the leak that Cohen is willing to say this came from Cohen, because Cohen's lawyer, Lanny Davis, said, oh, we didn't leak this. And that suggests it was the Trump team that leaked this. Why would they do it? Historically, they do that to get ahead of something that's even worse. And of course, Paul Manafort's trial starts tomorrow. Michael Cohen is about to say who knows what. There's a lot of different problems going on. So if Cohen was about to come forward with this, it's possible the Trump team leaked it to get ahead of it. And by the way, I'd still love to see the guy's tax returns. Let's not forget about that. Donald Trump has unleashed another unhinged attack on Twitter, a series of bizarre and confused tweets rife with the bogus capitalization we've become accustomed to, and most importantly, totally baseless allegations. The focus is Robert Mueller and Russia and the investigation. I'm going to show you the tweets. It's very clear Trump is nervous between the Manafort trial starting tomorrow, Cohen ready to give it all up to Robert Mueller, news that Trump knew and approved of the Trump Tower meeting with Russians promising dirt on Hillary. The guy is clearly nervous, and yesterday he unleashed the following tirade about Robert Mueller. I won't even mention that there are 14 improper or 13 improper capitalizations here. Just know that they're there. There is no collusion, Trump said. The Robert Mueller rigged witch hunt, headed now by 17, increased from 13, including an Obama White House lawyer, angry Democrats, was started by a fraudulent dossier paid for by crooked Hillary and the DNC. Therefore, the witch hunt is an illegal scam. Is Robert Mueller ever going to release his conflicts of interest with respect to President Trump, including the fact that we had a very nasty and contentious business relationship? I turned him down to head the FBI one day before appointment as special counsel. And Comey is his close friend. Also, why is Mueller only appointing angry Dems, some of whom have worked for crooked Hillary, others, including himself, have worked for Obama? And why isn't Mueller looking at all of the criminal activity and real Russian collusion on the Democrats' side Podesta dossier? I'm wondering if there's anything that's true in that rant. 13 random capitalizations, but beyond that, Democrats aren't running Mueller's investigation. In fact, Republican Mueller, appointed by Republican George W. Bush, is running it. The dossier wasn't fraudulent. It also wasn't the basis for the investigation. Nothing about the probe is illegal. That's been explored significantly in detail at this point. And the fact that Mueller was FBI director for Obama, again, seems totally irrelevant since he was appointed, not only is he a Republican, he was appointed by Republican George W. Bush. And what you've got to realize is that Trump's 4-tweet tirade does nothing to attack the merit or the facts of what happened, or what Cohen knows, or what Trump did. And I like how also Trump says he had a very nasty relationship with Robert Mueller. There's this story, Pat, that Mueller angrily left Trump's golf club like 10 years ago over a dispute over golf club fees. Mueller has put out a statement, or his spokesperson has, saying he just left the club. Like, there was really no controversy. But in either case, that just has nothing to do with this.
Seems so minor. I'm moving. I'm going to a different club. I don't want to support this anymore.
I'm going to play golf somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why there's a so-called witch hunt that has already found 32 people to indict. If that's the big blockbuster that makes Mueller personally committed to a vendetta against Trump, you're going to need to come up with something bigger. And this is all the behavior. Somebody who's really worried that the probe is not only not ending, it's advancing, and it's getting closer and closer to Trump. And to put a final point on that, let's go to White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders herself. She said back in 2016, quote, "When you're attacking FBI agents because you're under criminal investigation, you're losing." That seems to be the most prescient comment about this entire thing. And of course, it wasn't made about Trump at the time, but it certainly seems to apply today. Send me your thoughts. What do you think is behind this absolutely unhinged Twitter tirade that Trump unleashed? I'm on Twitter at @DPacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I am joined today by Carter Page, who is the managing partner of Global Energy Capital, former foreign policy advisor to then candidate, now President Donald Trump, and also a central figure in the Trump-Russia investigation. He's mentioned a number of times by name in this now infamous Christopher Steele dossier, which we will get to. First of all, thank you so much for joining us, Carter.
No, nice to speak with you, David. Just one brief little correction. I was a member of the Trump campaign's Foreign Policy Advisory Committee. I was a volunteer on that for a while. I actually never had any direct relationship with then candidate Donald Trump, and I've never spoken with him. But
certainly,
just
yes.
a minor clarification.
No doubt. So, I mean, how did you? I guess that's a good place to start. How did you end up? Even as part of that group that was offering that advice on a volunteer basis?
You know, I've been involved in a lot of foreign policy debates and projects throughout my life. I was, I've been a fellow at various think tanks. Spent several years at the Center for National Policy in Washington. So, I knew that obviously he was a candidate, and I believed that a lot of the things he was talking about in a foreign policy context made a lot of sense. And so, I knew some people that had contacts with him. So I went ahead and I volunteered in late 2015, early 2016.
So you were, in other words, you identified aspects of his platform that appealed to you when it comes to foreign policy. And so nobody reached out to you. You sort of made the first step and reached out through intermediaries to the Trump campaign.
Yes. Yep. That's right.
And what
I've been into. I was actually a member of the New York delegation for then Senator McCain when he was a candidate in 2008. So I was out in the convention in Minnesota. So I knew various contacts through that. In terms of Republican circles, that was some similar stuff which I had done in the past.
And even though it was on a volunteer basis in the sense that you weren't paid, not everybody who wanted to volunteer to advise on foreign policy was welcomed, right? So there was some reciprocity there. There was a certain point at which the campaign said, okay, we're putting together this group. It's a volunteer group. But the idea that anybody who wanted to volunteer would be part of that group, you're certainly not saying that. You were part of an established group.
Well, the term of reciprocity is, I think it relates to mutual benefit, right? I mean, I was just a volunteer, and the main benefit, it was like a charity for me, right?
You saw it as charity work to
cent.
advise the Trump organization.
Yeah, it's not the Trump organization. Again, there was
the campaign. I apologize. Yeah,
the campaign. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. So let's talk about the foreign policy elements of Trump's platform that appealed to you, that made you say, this is somebody I would want to advise on foreign policy. What was it that he was saying, particularly at that point in the campaign, that so appealed to you, that it motivated you to get in touch and say, here's where I want to volunteer?
I think it continued to solidify over time. And the one speech I would refer you back to was, I believe it was April 27, 2016, his speech at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, where he kind of outlined the specifics of it. And I don't have the full document in front of me, but some of the main themes is, there's been a lot of disasters in U.S. foreign policy, and the time has now come to take a new approach, try some different strategies. And he alluded to some of the wars that had unnecessarily been created, particularly Iraq, etc. And some of the relationships which had really gone downhill significantly. And
which relationships would be under that umbrella?
I think a couple that he particularly highlighted was, or at least in one speech, may have meant one quote in the fairly long speech may have mentioned was, major powers in the P5, permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council, including China and Russia. And I thought, that made a lot of sense.
And your expertise is really focused in Russia in a sense, right? I mean, I look back at your PhD dissertation and a lot of the work that you've done. You lived in Russia for 3 years. So is it fair to say that among those countries, your particular expertise and relationships that you had bringing in were connected to Russia, or would you say one of the other countries might be where you had more expertise?
I would, it wasn't really relationships. It's just, I think, you alluded to two sides, relationships and expertise.
Yeah.
Yes, I lived in Russia for 3 years, from 2004 to 2007. But, that was, around a decade ago, right? So in the years since, have done a lot in the Middle East, Africa, Asia, across Europe, a little bit in Latin America, and mostly international energy issues related to the United States, where, a lot of the shale technologies and other innovations that U.S. entrepreneurs have been doing, particularly in the energy sector, which had been my main specialty, can be a catalyst for, going back to your term reciprocity,
Yeah.
Possibilities for mutual benefit between the United States and others. So,
But to be clear, and I want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding, when you pointed out that there were foreign policy ideas that you liked from Trump, and you listed a number of countries there where you have expertise. You mentioned African countries and also Latin America. Trump didn't make bettering relations with African countries and Latin America a significant part of his platform, right? It was really, of the ones you listed, it was really Russia where he was talking about it.
Well, I think he's alluded to, I would encourage you to look back at that Mayflower speech from April 2016, because it gives a good sense of the concepts he was really thinking about and starting to move forward on. And I think it compares and meshes nicely with a lot of the things he has already done in his initial year and a half in office. So I think there is a little bit of a misunderstanding, or I should say a significant misunderstanding with an overemphasis on Russia, given the conspiracy theories related to that. But
what would be an
overall,
example, just so our audience understands, when you say like conspiracy theories related to Russia? That's such a term that can be used in so many different ways. What would be like an example conspiracy theory about Russia, at least as it pertains to you, maybe, since I'm only talking to you here, not other people?
Well, sure. Well, let's. I'm happy to talk about it. Look, as I wrote in my letter to then director of the FBI, Comey, on September 25th, 2016. Let me see. Do I have a copy of this? So as I noted to him, there was this, that you alluded to the dossier, the world premiere of that dossier was launched or shown to the public on September 23rd, 2016. An excerpt from that,
sure,
which alluded to completely ludicrous allegations that the DNC's consultants had come up with, that I had met with the CEO of Rosneft and a senior officer within the Kremlin during my July 2016 trip to Moscow. So as I mentioned to then Director Comey in my first sentence, I said, I wanted to provide you with a few basic facts that should help underscore what a complete waste of time this witch hunt directed at me is. Right? So I think, it really, I don't, I can only speak for myself.
Yeah, that's all I'm asking you to do.
Most of the people whose names have been involved in this ongoing saga, I never even spoke with or have met in my entire life.
Well, if we can, let's explore, because our audience might not have everything that you have in front of you or the awareness of all of the details. I mean, just like as an example, when you testified before Congress in November of 2017, you did say you met with Andrei Baranov, who's not the CEO of Rosneft, but he is the head of investor relations, right? That is accurate.
Okay, so look, I mean, what's your favorite sports figure?
My favorite sports figure. I have no idea. I'm not sure what the relevance is of that.
So, let's see, who's the best, who's the top star in the Boston Celtics? If you walk by the TD Garden, the Boston Garden,
sure,
and, talk to someone there, I mean, to say that you are, have some big conspiracy.
Well, but hold on a second, Carter. That's
the
not
owner
fair.
of the Boston Celtics, et cetera. I mean, I went, so just to be clear, you're alluding to Andrei
No, I'm not alluding.
Baranov,
Let's take
right?
a step back. Hold on, if we can, Carter, because I don't want to get off on the wrong foot with you. I'm not alluding or implying anything. I'm just saying 5 minutes ago, you said it was alleged you met with the CEO of Rosneft, and that was, you said it was ludicrous, it was a witch hunt, et cetera. What I'm saying is, okay, you didn't meet with the CEO, but you didn't walk by on the street. You met with the head of investor relations, Andrei Baronov. True or not true?
There was a big party. We were watching the Euro Cup.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Portugal versus Wales or something like that.
Okay.
Everyone is just so. I stopped by this party that was organized by one of the big U.S. investment banks in Moscow with a ton of people. And yes, I said hello to him there.
Okay.
So it's completely apples and oranges that this crazy conspiracy that this guy is offering. The CEO of this company is offering me an $11 billion bribe.
Well, but hold on. I'm not saying that, right, Carter? So I'm just trying to take it step by step.
That's okay. Let me tell you something. I forget exactly who asked me that question in that testimony. It's been 7,
10
8
months or something.
Since,
yeah.
But the implication, which that individual asking me that question, it may have been Congressman Schiff, if not, I believe one of the other Democrats on the committee, is that, maybe there's some wrongdoing there, or maybe there's some shred of truth in this absolutely ridiculous document known as the Dodgy Dossier.
Fair enough. But so, okay. So
as it relates to me, there's not. Yeah.
Sure, fair enough. So, okay, you did say hello. Now, you were asked during the same testimony, were sanctions or the privatization of Rosneft brought up during that exchange, as brief as it may have been? And you said that Andrei Baronov may have briefly mentioned it. So that is more than just saying hello. If he maybe briefly mentioned either sanctions or privatizing Rosneft, that's more than just hello, right? So that, again, it doesn't seem is under dispute here.
Okay, David, if I asked you, when you were at the Boston Garden,
yep.
Sitting at, similarly watching a game.
Good.
If you were watching a game there over 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. I was. This is a great example. I remember I did this exact thing you're saying. Good.
Okay, so when you were there, and if I'm asking you a full transcript of every conversation you had, in that time when you're sitting there, it's hard to remember. And all I said is I may have, that had briefly talked about this, thing that was in the news, right? Sanctions is a driver of, it's a significant consideration in the economy of Russia. So it may have briefly come up.
I think the thing that concerns people, Carter, is that we've spent 5 or 6 minutes just on 2 questions, which are like, did you meet Rosneft's head of investor relations, and might sanctions have been discussed? And it's almost like you think that it is actually a big deal because you're saying so much as opposed to just answering it. And I think this is sometimes in the other interviews that you've done, what I've perceived as making people say, what, these seem like simple questions. Why isn't he just answering them? Because if it was no big deal, it doesn't seem like there needs to be so much elaboration, Maybe I just don't understand it.
No, because there's, unfortunately, David, and I haven't had a chance to listen to your show, but I know that a lot of people they like to take a lot of things out of context. So I wanted to make sure,
fair enough,
that you have the full context.
That's fair. I just like to ask.
Those two little topics you raised are absolutely irrelevant, particularly in comparison to the highly relevant crimes against American democracy that the DNC funded through that, $1 million plus smear campaign, which was totally false as it relates to me.
When it comes to that, when it comes to attacks on American democracy, at this time, speaking only for yourself as Carter Page, the individual, do you believe the consensus of the intelligence community that Russia not only meddled in the 2016 election, but meddled specifically to try to help Donald Trump and defeat Hillary Clinton, or is that a finding that you reject?
I have no evidence to support that. All I know from firsthand experience, and as we've seen through 400 pages of largely redacted information that came out this weekend. The U.S. Intelligence Committee during that time, when they were, working on those issues, and I was getting attacked by the DNC, there was a lot of government collusion with political operatives. But what I know firsthand through the evidence that I've very much seen and am intimately familiar with is that collusion between the DNC, political operatives, and the U.S. government, their intelligence committee, the same individuals that you're asking me to assess, there was serious collusion, and they did engage in hacking.
But so
I know that
question,
firsthand,
Carter,
and I think we now have it on the public record from Saturday that they did engage in hacking against myself. So that, I'm not an expert in those other topics, David, but I think what we do know is there was definitely hacking against me. So
do you
as a way of getting at the Trump campaign,
findings of the intelligence community that Russia meddled to help Donald Trump? You said you're not an expert in that, but what we have is those are their findings. Do you have a particular reason to disbelieve those findings, is my question.
I don't have a reason to disbelieve. I think what I have is, I look back at a track record when the CIA and other U.S. intelligence community assets have, over the course of its history, the 71-year history of the CIA, came up with these false theories that then led to war. So most infamously with the original Dodgy dossier. That's why, when I refer to the Dodgy dossier of 2016, which was used as a way of attacking myself and the Trump campaign.
But I'm not asking about that now.
The reason why I say that is the 2002-2003 Dodgy dossier was also a PR campaign, also from London, which was used to sell the public on a war with Iraq. And all I'm saying is I'm not willing to jump on any theories from the intel community, particularly given the crimes that have been committed against myself and other Trump movement supporters. So we'll have to see. I keep an open mind, but
what would you consider as evidence?
What
would you consider as evidence to say, okay, Russia did meddle to help Donald Trump?
Look, I mean, if there's strong evidence on that, I just haven't seen anything like that. And I think President Trump made a good point in Helsinki about the server, right?
Yes,
I mean, I think it's important that you have to look at the servers, and the fact that they didn't even hand that over and just used similarly DNC funded campaign operatives to make that assessment. I know what other DNC-funded campaign operatives have done in terms of election interference with the misinformation campaign, but I don't have much insights about that. Yeah.
We're speaking with Carter Page. We'll take a quick break and continue with him right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We're continuing our conversation with Carter Page. Carter, I know we have limited time, so there's just a few different things I wanted to touch on and get your thoughts. The government claims you were an agent of a foreign power. Is that a finding that you reject, accept, or aren't sure in terms of how that's being defined?
David, it's a finding that's just absolutely hilarious when I read it. I mean, it's just, if you look at, the elements which they're using to come to that conclusion, some fake news reports. I mean, it's just such a shame for, the standards of law enforcement. But again, I think what's nice about what happened on Saturday is that they started, taking some steps towards transparency. So hopefully hopefully as those 100-plus pages of black lines are eventually revealed, we'll understand how that's much clearer.
What I just don't understand about
incorrect.
that, and again, this might be my naivete, and if it is, I'm totally open to you explaining it to me. When you say that it's absurd or laughable or a joke or whatever, you were the subject of government surveillance of an American citizen. That requires a very, very high threshold to even be allowed in our justice system. Many of the people reviewing those requests were Republican appointees. So how do you explain that if there's just nothing there, these requests were approved and subsequently approved? How does it happen, or am I just naive and I don't get it?
Well, look, I think, a court is given information, right?
Sure. Right.
And I think it's fairly common, actually, that a court is going to use the information that's provided to it, right?
Sure.
So there's this concept, and I believe it says it directly on the top of that application, but it's ex parte, right? Which means, basically it's one side is putting in this, giving this information without listening to the other side.
Yep.
So, I think that's exactly what happened, and I think as we've seen through real hard evidence based on the great work that various committees in Congress have been doing to get to the bottom of this,
yep,
there was definitely some political motivations and false information that was given to that court. And I don't hold anything against those 4 Republican appointed judges. I have a similar case. I have a similar, somewhat related case in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York.
Mm-hmm.
And my judge was given false information by the U.S. Department of Justice as well. And I understand the reason why people assume that the U.S. Department of Justice is going to do the right thing, right? Particularly, some judges actually served as assistant U.S. attorneys or other, DOJ positions in their own careers, and it comes with the assumption that people are doing the right thing, right?
But aside
and I think
from that,
I think as we started to see, there's that unfortunately did not occur, and that's the reason why that happened.
Why would they target you with this slanted evidence and concocting a storyline to get a court to go along with it, though, if, as you say, you were this minor volunteer-only guy who never met Trump, never spoke to Trump? Why would they say, let's concoct a case against Carter Page? Why would they do that?
Well, I mean, listen, I don't know whether you caught any of that testimony by one of the FBI's HR professionals from a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
But, I think there's a lot of evidence of bias, and so... And
by Republicans, to be clear. By Republicans against you.
No, I'm talking about the quote-unquote secret society within the FBI and, people that said, let's stop the Trump presidency. That's what I'm referring to. And so I think there was definitely motive and intent. And, we're still in early days. This is
I agree with that.
Early part of a long saga, and we got a little bit of disclosure over the weekend. We'll hopefully get a fair bit more as the rest of these documents get disclosed. But so far, it's looking pretty ugly related to the really illicit intent of some people that are operatives within the U.S. intelligence community. So,
Carter, I know you got to go. Last thing I wanted to ask about, do you believe you will end up indicted as part of this Trump-Russia investigation?
David, I can't even imagine anything that I would be, considered for an indictment for. I mean, I've never done anything wrong. I've been going to Russia for over 25 years. First time, in the closing months of the Soviet era in the summer of '91. Nothing I've ever done in Russia related to Russia was not only, nothing was illegal, nothing was unethical, what I've ever done over there. So
you don't believe you will end up
indicted? It's
indicted?
preposterous.
You don't believe you
Absolutely not. impossible. Yeah.
All right, Carter Page, managing partner of Global Energy Capital. I really do appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. I hope you feel that I've been respectful. I've done my best not to interrupt. I don't think I've done any yelling, so I hope that it was the tone.
No,
was to your
it was
liking.
nice. It was nice to talk to you, David. It's my pleasure.
Okay, I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Daniel Burke. Daniel Burke is the same Daniel Burke that has designed a lot of our calendar images, who has designed a really great image that might be turned into a David Pakman Show puzzle upcoming. More on that coming up. So Daniel, thank you for your support over the years and also welcoming you as a newer member. Paul Christensen is today's sustaining member of the day. Join Daniel and Paul at www.joinpakman.com. It's getting to be time for all media across party lines, across platforms, to unite to protect themselves from Donald Trump, who is waging a never-ending, increasingly disturbing war on the media. I told you last week that the Trump administration has launched some major attacks on freedom of the press, calling the media the enemy of the American people, talking about journalism licenses, opening up libel laws to make it easier to sue media outlets. They banned CNN reporter Caitlin Collins from a Rose Garden press conference for some questions she had asked. They've been pushing this outrageously partial push poll to turn people even more strongly against the media. And now Donald Trump went on, this isn't even the first Sunday Twitter tirade that we're talking about today, but he went on a Sunday Twitter tirade against what he calls the very unpatriotic media. Why is the media unpatriotic, according to Trump? Because they report what government does. He specifically calls out the New York Times and the Washington Post, who, by the way, have done really great investigative reporting on the Trump administration. This is what dictators do, directly attacking the press that holds them accountable, or at least tries to hold them accountable. And Donald Trump tweeting, when the media, driven insane by their Trump derangement syndrome, reveals internal deliberations of our government, it truly puts the lives of many, not just journalists, at risk. Very unpatriotic. Freedom of the press also comes with a responsibility to report the news accurately. 90% of media coverage of my administration is negative, despite the tremendously positive results we are achieving. It's no surprise that confidence in the media is at an all-time low. I will not allow our great country to be sold out by anti-Trump haters in the dying newspaper industry, no matter how much they try to distract and cover it up. Our country is making great progress under my leadership, and I will never stop fighting for the American people. As an example, the failing New York Times and the Amazon Washington Post do nothing but write bad stories, even on positive achievements. They will never change. It's quite a mouthful. 90% actually sounds low. Like, I can think of 3 to 4 things Trump has done that make sense, and some of those might even have been done by accident. If 10% of coverage of Trump were positive, it would actually be too high, given what Donald Trump has actually done, because this is an administration that's a total and utter sham. And what he's trying to do is something that's not that uncommon for the right, which is they want to get a monopoly on patriotism. It's another sign of authoritarianism, being the arbiters, the gatekeepers of what's patriotic and what's not patriotic. And it was also revealed yesterday, interestingly, that Donald Trump had a meeting with the New York Times publisher, A.G. Sulzberger, and talked about how he thinks the media is the enemy of the people. And Sulzberger reportedly warned Trump and said, you know, it's kind of a dangerous thing for you to be doing that. And yes, it's dangerous to the foundational tenets of our country. PR-wise, I don't know that it's that dangerous for Trump to call the media the enemy of the American people, because he's having some success turning his base against a free press.
Yeah, it is really working for him, and that's why fewer and fewer Americans support like the Robert Mueller investigation, and his poll numbers are going up too. I just think it's completely unfounded. Like, it's not the media's job to be patriotic. It's the media's job to tell the truth and to be objective. And, you know, if they were going to be patriotic, we would have state-run media, which I hope we don't have anymore. That's a fair point,
which is, layer one is, if you're going to attribute patriotism to the media, I argue that discussing and exposing what our government does is a patriotic act, because it aligns with what the sort of foundational tenets of our country are. But there's another side to it, which is Media should not be making decisions on the basis of patriotism. They should be making decisions on the basis of their duty to report what it is that's going on. And it's almost like irrelevant whether we attribute patriotism to the media.
Yeah, I mean, you'd see that maybe in North Korea or
Oh, yeah.
Russia or
Yeah.
Qatar, but hopefully not in the United States.
The most patriotic act you can do as a media outlet is to report on what is happening, and what the government does is part of that. And of course, Trump claimed to be a fan of transparency during the campaign. Seems almost hypocritical that now he thinks reporting on what the government does is bad. But that being said, as I mentioned earlier, Paul Manafort's trial starts tomorrow. It's very clear Michael Cohen is about to give up the really good goods. Trump's own CFO from the Trump organization might be called to testify under oath. The guy is probably panicking, and that relates to why he's going on multiple totally outrageous, hyperbolic, apoplectic Twitter rants on Sunday over the weekend. I have today for you maybe one of the most brilliant pieces of political satire and political interviewing that I've seen. Sacha Baron Cohen, as we've talked about, has a new show on Showtime. It's called Who is America? Sacha Baron Cohen, you may know from characters such as Ali G, Borat, Bruno, the Dictator. He has a new character who's an Israeli anti-terrorism expert called Eran Morad, or as the Israelis might say, Eran Morad. And as Sacha Baron Cohen says during his actual show. And in this interview, he speaks to accused serial child sex assaulter Roy Moore, who of course lost to Doug Jones in the Alabama special election, accused by multiple women, including some very young women, of sexually assaulting them. It's unclear when this interview took place, and that's kind of relevant. And the concept is the following. Colonel Eran Morad says to Roy Moore, that they have developed in Israel a device, a piece of technology, which can detect sex offenders and particularly pedophiles because they secrete an enzyme called DDHT, which is supposedly detectable by this piece of equipment. And what he does is just as a sample, he puts it over himself and then he puts it over Roy Moore. And of course, the gag is it beeps over Roy Moore. Roy Moore doesn't know that it's obviously just like a metal detector. It's a totally standard metal detector. And it gets really, really awkward. Roy Moore visibly uncomfortable and ultimately ends the interview earlier than planned. Take a look at this.
They have now used this technology to identify other abnormalities. It turns out that sex offenders, and particularly pedophiles, secrete an enzyme for DDHT, which is actually detectable. It is 3 times the level of non-perverts. So the phrase sweating like a rapist is actually based on science. So in Israel, they have developed a machine that is used in schools and playgrounds to detect anyone coming in. And if they detect a pedophile, the wand alerts the law enforcement and the schools within a 100-mile radius. It is very, very simple to use. You just switch it on, and because neither of us are sex offenders, then it makes absolutely nothing. You just put it on, you put it nearby. Wait, this is obviously a problem. Hold on. Hold on. It must be faulty. It's malfunctioning. I'm sure it will do the same with the other guy here. Chezi? Yeah. Let me just take it. Sorry, is this your jacket?
Yes.
Did you lend the jacket to somebody else, maybe?
No. I've been married for 33.
Sure.
I never had an accusation of such things.
I am not accusing you at all. This is
Well,
not...
then, if this is an instrument, certainly I'm not a pedophile, okay?
No, but the machine is...
Well, I don't know. Maybe Israeli technology hasn't developed properly.
This is 99.8% accurate.
Well,
it is not saying that you are a pedophile, of course not.
I am simply cutting this conversation right now.
No,
Thank you.
Have you been...
Been nice.
Have you
I
been in the
support
Philippines?
Israel. I don't support this kind of stuff. Thank you.
No, I'm not saying that you're a sex offender.
This is just the best. And we don't know when it was filmed, and that's sort of relevant because, of course, Roy Moore was accused by multiple people of child sexual assault. Strictly speaking, it's not pedophilia. because as far as we know, he didn't try to have sex with prepubescent girls, just girls that are very young and not legally adults in some states. But the funniest part of all this is that Roy Moore seemed to believe the technology was legitimate, right? Like, it's just a regular handheld metal detector. It clearly doesn't measure the secretion of DDHT or any chemical which would indicate whether somebody's a pedophile. As crazy as the entire thing is, and as brilliant as the entire thing is, Roy Moore seemed to believe that the technology is real.
I actually think he kind of passed the test, though, right? Because if he said that, oh, this actually is not my suit code, it's someone else, I'm borrowing it.
Yeah.
Then he would have failed, right?
Well.
But I think he found the best way out of this whole scenario.
Who would believe that? I think he said something totally boneheaded, which is, I've been married 33 years. Like, that doesn't explain whether you do or don't like little kids, right? If anything, that's a response that should raise a red flag because it says nothing about pedophilia, right? Are you attracted to prepubescent children? I've been married for 33 years. It's actually a non sequitur when you think about it.
I guess I'm also just comparing it to the other Sacha Baron Cohen interviews.
Yeah.
Like he got one Republican to blurt out the N-word and
Yes,
to expose himself. He got other Republicans to advocate for a kindergartens program
You
where
think this is better
3
than
and
that?
4-year-olds have weapons. Yeah, it's much better.
No news yet about whether Roy Moore is sending his Jewish lawyer, who we know he has because he and his wife talked about how they have a Jewish lawyer, in order to prove that they don't dislike Jews, to sue the colonel here. And Sacha Baron Cohen, of course, dragging these people beyond the limits of its absurdity. And I was thinking, like, how far would he have to go where no one, like everybody gets that it's just a goof, you know? And I think it would be disturbingly far. I think it would be crazy what he would have to do to get to a point where nobody thinks it's a real thing.
I mean, there have been a few people who have called him out. Apparently, he showed up to one gun store,
Yeah.
and the owner called him out for being Borat, and there was
Yeah.
another congressman who didn't advocate for the program he was pushing. So it doesn't work every time.
If you don't like this, tell me why, because I think that this is absolutely and totally brilliant. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. You can call any time of day. Take a listen to what this caller asks.
David, how in the hell can the far right be both pro-Israel and anti-Semitic? This is absolute nonsense.
Yeah. So this is an
Goodbye.
interesting question. This is interesting. By definition, if you don't think being anti-Israel is anti-Semitic, then by its inverse, it's possible to be pro-Israel and to also be anti-Semitic. And we've talked about American evangelical Christian support for Israel. These are people who are quote, supporters of Israel, but they harbor a ton of anti-Semitic views. They don't support Israel because they think it's, you know, a great place for the Jews or whatever. They support Israel because they believe that supporting Israel and Jews going to Israel will cause the second coming of Christ and the return of their Messiah, right? And in some of these second coming stories, when Jesus comes back, the Jews die, or all but some specific number of the Jews die. Sometimes it's like, I think, 144,000 Jews that survive. Everybody else dies. There's other examples as well. So there is no shortage of pro-Israel, anti-Semitic people that are out there. And American evangelical Christians are just one example. We have a fantastic bonus show for you today. Sign up and get access at www.joinpackman.com.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.